And next slide, please. All right, so let's start by talking a little bit about customer service. And sometimes dealing, especially in nonprofit and direct service, we forget that we're really there as an element of customer service, and it really should be about the veteran that walks through the door. But when we talk about it in terms of employment, the thing that we try and keep in mind at Swords to Plowshares is that we actually have a dual customer service role as well. So what that means for us is that we not only are, our customers are not only the veterans that walk through our door, but those are definitely our primary customers, but also the employers that we work with are our customers as well. So that when we're sending over a veteran to fill a role there or interview for a job, we want to make sure that we're sending over a veteran that has the skills that they could hire on the spot. You know, so we look at that as that dual customer service approach. So that's an important part of understanding what customer service means. But also that customer service runs through every part of what we do. It's not just that there's a customer service department or that, you know, that one area, that's the only people that concern themselves with customer service. For us at Swords to Plowshares, we look at it throughout the entire experience. When a veteran walks through our doors, they should feel like we're there to help them at every turn, and at every turn we're making sure that we're taking that customer service approach. So every person that they're interacting with is there to make sure that their needs are met. Okay, so next slide, please. Understanding the word veteran has a special connotation, and sometimes negative, sometimes positive, but always weighted within the military and within the veteran community. So we have to understand that not everyone who spent time in the military self-identifies with the word veteran. In fact, most people, a very high percentage of people who have spent time in the military. So when I do a lot of these presentations, and I train lots of different cohorts on interacting with veterans. So I train police officers, I train HR and hiring managers on making their companies veteran-friendly and how to hire veterans. I train lots of different cohorts on interacting with veterans. And I ask all the time, who was in the military? And then I ask, before today, how many of you self-identified with the word veteran? And very few usually raise their hands. And it's almost never women, because we know the data shows us that statistically women very rarely self-identify with the word veteran because it tends to be loaded. Younger veterans very rarely self-identify with this word veteran, right? So as you're doing outreach and you're talking to someone and you ask them, are you a veteran? Or on your literature, you're using the word veteran. Rather, what I'd suggest is using wording like, have you ever been in the military? Even the word service, to a degree, some veterans that we see coming in to Swords to Plowshares dislike the word service. So the question that will get you the broadest range of answers is, have you ever been in the military? And then some other kind of stereotypes that we want to get around are the fact that not all veterans are in crisis, right? We're not a monolith. Veterans myself, right? I'm 100% service connected for PTSD, but yet I work full-time. Even though my employer makes reasonable accommodations for me, I still work full-time. Even on days like today where I'm working from home, I'm still able to be employed full-time. Even though I do experience crisis at moments, right? I am 100% service connected for PTSD, and I do experience crisis, but I'm not in crisis all the time, right? Not all veterans have served in combat, and part of that combat stigma is what part of why there's a lot of stigma around the word veteran. A lot of veterans who weren't in combat say, well, I'm not a real veteran because I wasn't in combat. And then even veterans who served, let's say, in Iraq like myself, but weren't out kicking down doors, right? I worked for a general when I was in Iraq, and so some veterans don't feel like they're actual combat vets, so they don't use that terminology. And then lastly, I'm sure most of you know that that not all veterans have access to VA health care, which can be really important sometimes to understand that. All right. Next slide, please. For a lot of HVRP programs that have tended to serve usually older era veterans and are trying to understand how to outreach to younger veterans, we have to understand that there's different needs involved and how to do those different targeted outreach strategies, right? And it's a different strategy. So we first have to understand who we're attempting to outreach to and really get a targeted outreach strategy, because it is a very different outreach strategy to outreach to, let's say, Vietnam vets who are still on the street versus, let's say, a Iraq or Afghanistan vet who might be couch surfing. Next slide, please. And so as we kind of unclutter the veteran landscape and figure out exactly who we're going to do that outreach to, that's part of this, right? Understanding, are we going to be, when we're opening up and we're going to be serving these younger vets, are we looking to serve more women veterans? Are we looking to serve more post 9/11 vets who are low income? Like, who is it that we're intending to serve? That's a very important part of this. All right, so next slide, please. Little talk about materials. We take materials at Source of Plowshares really very seriously, because it's usually the first interaction that you end up having with a veteran is the materials. They actually see these things long before you actually end up getting a chance to talk to somebody. They'll see some materials, whether that's a flyer or a brochure or your signage. They're going to end up seeing your materials even before you get a chance to talk to somebody. So bad materials can sour a relationship before you even have a chance to say anything. And you can have an amazing program, you can have amazing staff that knocks it out of the park every single time they talk to somebody, but by having bad materials, you can end up souring that relationship long before it starts. So let's talk a little bit about what makes good and what makes bad materials off the jump, right? So let's talk a little bit about what's on the screen right now. Right now, you're looking at a couple of SWORDS brochures. The one on the right is our general SWORDS brochure. The one on the left is our brochure for our employment and training department. It might be a little bit difficult to see on your screen if you're looking at a smaller screen, but hopefully you've all got really cool big computers that you can see this really nicely. And notice that the pictures that you're seeing are pictures of actually people. They're not, 1995 Microsoft Office clip art, right? We don't see that hockey player taking a slap shot or something like that, right? We're actually seeing human beings that are representative of the types of people that we're looking to outreach to. They're actual veterans. Usually we try and use pictures of our clients. If that's not possible, though, we do use pictures of otherwise. Next slide, please. So talking about some of those do's, right? Make sure that your materials clearly state what your program does, who is eligible, how to apply, and how to reach you for more information, right? These have to be really clear without being cluttered, right? You don't have to fill every piece of space. And like I said, using good graphics and pictures. There are really great tools out there right now that are really open source. In fact, I've included a link there that has really good outreach pictures that are free sourced already so that you can use them. They're already cleared, but there's lots more out there. We use Google all the time. Google is a wonderful thing, and you can use materials. But I really encourage you to take photos of your clients that you're serving and get releases and do it obviously the proper way, but making sure that you're going through and putting the pictures of the people that you're intending to serve and that you are serving already into your materials, because that's the type of thing that actually will pay off in the long run, because people want to see themselves in those outreach materials. Next slide, please. One of the big things on the don'ts, actually the two big ones that are really highlighted in the two spots the top two spots. One is filling every spot, right? I see this a lot in outreach materials is people think they have to fill every little space in, and it just looks jumbled, it's confusing, and it ends up being just noise, and people ignore it, right? And the other big thing is the idea of putting flags and lots of typically patriotic imagery on it. There's nothing wrong per se with patriotic imagery. I don't want to make it seem as though patriotic imagery and flags is bad. But the science tells us that because people attempt to use this imagery to market to veterans consistently, veterans tend to tone it out because it's used to market to us all the time, and it becomes like background noise to us. And so because veterans see this type of material so often, we tend to ignore it. So what does draw our eye to it? If we look at the previous slide and what we talked about, the do's on there are we want to see pictures of ourselves, just like anyone else does, right? So if you're looking to outreach to women veterans, if you're looking to outreach to veterans of color, you want to put pictures of those veterans onto your outreach materials, right? So that's what we mean when we say using good pictures and good graphics, right? And try and avoid the typical patriotic imagery. And again, nothing wrong with that imagery. It's just that veterans see it so often, it becomes white noise to us. It just becomes background because we see it all the time. It ends up like pollution, right? And finally, the word female. This is something that we decided to include after giving this presentation a couple times because of the feedback that we got from women veterans and how toxic this word really is to a lot of women veterans and the way that it reads from a military aspect, right? We tend not to think of it for the most part from a civilian aspect, although, you know, from street harassment and things like that, we hear it a lot. But in the military, and I can say having been in the infantry, we tend to use it almost like a cuss word in the infantry, right? It's like, oh, that's the female area, that's the female latrine, that's the female barracks, and it becomes almost like a cuss word, right? And Dottie Guy, who works at the Oakland Vet Center, wrote a wonderful piece that I can send over to Antonio and hopefully send it out to all of you on not using the word female. And she's the outreach worker for the Oakland VA and an Iraq combat veteran herself. And so we very much encourage the use of the word woman. And if we think about it, we don't use the term male generally when we refer to men who are veterans. We just say veteran or we just say men, and we default to that. But yet we use the term female when we talk about women veterans. Okay, next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about what your office actually looks like. This is really especially important when you have clients who come to your office, right? So the big things on there are making sure that the space is actually safe, right? If you're serving veterans who have experienced military sexual trauma, for example, right? What does that mean for your office to be a safe place for someone to come to who has experienced military sexual trauma, right? If you are serving families, do you have a place for kids to come? Is there a place for kids? Are there toys? Is there something for the kids to be occupied so that you can talk to the parents, right? If you look at this picture here, right, I see the Marine Corps flag like right big in the middle, and that's great. You know, Marines are really generally very proud of their service, just like the other branches, but they tend to put it out there a little bit more so than the others, right, which is cool. But, like, if you're running an outreach center, maybe if you're going to put up one branch, you probably should put up the others or none at all, right? These are the kind of things that you think about because, you know, if you're a Coast Guard veteran and you walk in, you see all the other branches represented but not yours, you know, how isolated does that make you feel, right? So making sure, what does your office look like? Would you feel comfortable walking in there? Would someone who's experienced military sexual violence feel okay walking in there? Would someone who's just spent years living out on the street, how do they feel walking in there? Is it a safe place for them to actually go into your office, and can they sit down okay? You know, if you know that your clientele is a lot of people who have post-traumatic stress, is your office a safe place for someone with post-traumatic stress? Do the backs of all your chairs face the doors, or do they face walls? Like, that's the sort of thing that we think about when we're laying out an office, and the pictures that are on the walls. All of this stuff leads to, is your office, is your staff, how is your staff trained? Is your staff trained on trauma-informed care? These are the things that we need to think about when we're serving younger veterans who are coming back with much more complex issues than we've seen before, right? We know that veterans of today who are accessing VA care are accessing VA care for more complex issues, right? We're seeing TBI, PTSD, multiple issues for those who are accessing care. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we've got our first poll question. I'm going to turn it back over to Antonio, who will walk us through the poll question.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so everyone will answer. Unfortunately, you can only answer one, but where do you primarily conduct outreach? And if you could just click one of those. One is VA and or vet centers, colleges and or universities, street outreach, online social media, or events and others. And I'll give you about another 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to share the results now. Can you see that, Jeff?
Sorry, yeah, I was talking on mute. My bad.
No, it's okay.
All right, so it looks like a lot of street outreach and a lot of at the VA Event Center, which actually totally makes sense. Lots of events and other, which is really great. We'll talk about that when we talk about outreach outside of the box, and some social media. That's really good. I wasn't expecting that. A little bit at college and universities. So this is right in line with what I expected to see from HVRP. So this is actually really in line with what I was expecting from this group. If we're looking to do outreach to younger era veterans, I would say we'll probably in the future, if we did this next year, I would probably say that we would see more college and university outreach and a bit more in the social media. But this is, I really like how much I'm seeing in number 5 in the events and other category. That's really cool. And so yeah, so let's go back to the slideshow and we'll keep going. Great, so next slide, please. All right, so again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but targeted outreach is really critical. Understanding who we're trying to outreach to will let us know where we should do that outreach, right? If we're trying to reach Vietnam veterans, then, you know, going to colleges and universities, we might get some Vietnam vets there, but likely we're not going to get a lot of Vietnam vets, just like if we're going to do a lot of if we're trying to get younger era veterans, we have to go to where younger era veterans are, right? So next slide. So let's talk about that younger era veteran. So OIF, OEF, OND, that's OIF is the Iraq Combat Mission, that's Operation Iraqi Freedom. OEF is Operation Enduring Freedom, that was the Afghanistan Combat Mission. And OND, is Operation New Dawn. That was the non-combat Iraq mission. All right, so a little bit about that. So social media is really a must. That has to happen if you are attempting to outreach to younger era veterans. Social media has to happen, right? And we'll talk a little bit more later on about how to do that, but that if you're not on LinkedIn especially, but also Twitter and Facebook, if you're not on social media and you're trying to do outreach to younger era veterans, it's really, you're starting in a deficit, okay? Colleges. A lot of people think about their local universities, but I would implore you to also think about community colleges. Veterans use community colleges at a higher rate than our civilian population does, so make sure that we're thinking about our colleges as well, and we'll get into that a little bit more detail later on about some of the places on campuses that you should be looking at, but campuses are also a great point. So your medical centers, every VA medical center should have a OIF, OEF, OND point person. They're now in the process of changing the name to the recently returning veteran coordinator. And this is a person you should know. If you're going to be outreaching to younger veterans, that is a person you should know their name, you should know their phone number, they should know you. That's the person that's going to be able to make really great referrals to you on a consistent basis. All right, next slide, please. So talking about women veterans. Women veterans do not access the VA at anywhere near the same rate as men do. All right, we know this statistically speaking, but women do engage in services, right? Women veterans are looking for services, but they're not engaging in the same ways that men do. So if we want to outreach to women veterans, we have to make sure that we're outreaching where women veterans are plugging into the system. So where are they doing that? They're doing it very much on college campuses, especially at community colleges, just like any of the younger veterans are, right? So that's one thing, is the community colleges especially. But then let's look at some of the women's service agencies, right? Let's look at WIC and SNAP. When I did outreach in Washington, D.C., both WIC and SNAP, the employees there knew me by name. They knew what my program was. They knew what the eligibility requirements were for it. They knew who to send over for it, and I got some of the best referrals for those programs from WIC and SNAP because they knew to ask. So I spent time with them, and they knew to ask, have you ever been in the military? They knew to ask then what type of discharge people got. They knew how to send someone over to us. And we got some of the best referrals possible because I spent a lot of time at the WIC and SNAP office talking to case managers there, talking to their intake folks, and letting them know about our program and actually going over their own intake and helping them add questions to their intake so that they could help their beneficiaries get also some housing benefits, right? And in your case, jobs benefits, right? So also, where else are women going, right? They're going to the women's clinic at the VA. So in addition to some of the other resources at VA, make sure that the women's clinic at the VA knows who you are, knows how to make those referrals, because part of what the intake that primary care physicians at the VA are doing is they're asking about housing stability. They're asking about some of these other things, and they can be making referrals to your programs. The women's shelters. Generally, a lot of women veterans aren't going to the veteran-specific shelter programs. They're not going to the veteran-specific housing programs, but they're going to domestic violence shelters. They're going to women's shelters for housing. They're still engaging in the system even if they're not going to veteran-specific care. So make sure that you're going to where they're going to engage in care. All right, next slide, please. So talking about the continuum of care. The continuum of care really is what I just talked about. It's all the different points where someone might access care, right? It's WIC, it's SNAP, it's all the different areas where someone might be accessing care. And veterans, a lot of times, the VA isn't the first place that they're going to access care. So all of those access points, those different points should know who you are and know how to refer someone over to you. And these are really important. And so you should know them and they should know you. And it should be able to be a warm handoff between the two. You should be referring over to them. They should be referring over to you. And we'll talk about this a little bit more down the line, but you should know names, right? So I knew Judy over at the WIC office so that, you know, if I had a client who needed something, we knew that we could send them over to Judy at WIC, right? But also, Judy at WIC knew that if she had somebody that that was one of her clients that needed help with housing and was a veteran, that if she sent them over to us, we answered the phone. We were there. We would, and if a voicemail was left, we were going to return the call because we had that type of relationship. Outreach is really about building relationships. It's not just about going out and putting up flyers. It's not just about, you know, having billboards or doing radio ads. It's about building relationships. It's about having those one-on-one relationships. And that's the thing to keep in mind, and building those relationships throughout the continuum of care. So even if you're not directly talking to the veteran, talking to people throughout the continuum who are going to make referrals to you can be critically important for meeting numbers and your objectives. Okay, next slide, please. So street outreach, we saw a lot of folks doing street outreach. Street outreach can be really great. It's critically important to meeting the aim of ending veteran homelessness, right, which we're going to do. I'm very confident that we're going to end veteran homelessness, and it's a critical part of that. What we have to understand with street outreach is who we're going to reach. If you're trying to reach younger era veterans, street outreach is not going to yield you very high numbers. There are some younger veterans on the streets, but most younger veterans who experience homelessness are going to be couch surfing, right? They're going to, and they're not going to meet the definition, the legal definition of homelessness, which I think, and I think a lot of others think, is a little bit problematic, and it can be tough because of that legal definition of homelessness. But, you know, that's the street outreach will yield you a certain population. It's probably not going to be a lot of younger era veterans. All right, next slide, please. And now talking about my favorite part, which is really talking about outreach outside of the box. I got a lot of great results reaching younger era veterans through going to concerts, actually. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I had a great relationship with the folks at the 930 Club, and I would table at a lot of concerts at the 930 Club, and I would meet a lot of veterans tabling at concerts. You can see the photo that's on this slide is of some of our employees at the San Francisco Giants game. Sorry if, and also Dottie Guy. That's Dottie Guy on the right of your screen there. That's Dottie, who works actually at the Oakland Vet Center and does some consulting with SOARS. But we actually have gotten folks who've come in who were at the baseball game and saw Swords of Plowshares and came in. We also have gotten donations from folks who saw Swords and said, I was looking for a veterans org to donate to. So we've had a lot of great things. And sorry for those of you out there who might hate the Giants. I'm not actually even a baseball fan. I'm a hockey guy. I'm an East Coaster, so I'm a big hockey guy. But we have this great relationship with the Giants because we do outreach outside of the box. So whether that's stand-downs, yellow ribbon events, concerts, sporting events, where are these vets going to in your community, right? We'll talk in a second about rural vets, but like, you know, whether that's that Friday night football game to the local community, where are they gathering in your local community? Where are people gathering in your local community? Because a lot of the younger era vets, we're not engaging in the same way, but we're still going to stuff that people go to, right? So outreach to the stuff that people are going to, because the veterans are still people, right? We're still humans. We're still going to the stuff in our community that people are still going to, right? Next slide, please. Talking about rural outreach, right? Rural outreach is going to look different than urban outreach and even suburban outreach. Rural outreach, you're going to spend more time to reach less people. There's going to be more travel involved. You're going to have to spend much more time per person, and that continuum of care is going to be much more important, right? Because when a person does access care somewhere, it's going to be really important that they get routed to you faster because they're not going to have the same amount of places that they can access care. And so it's going to be much more important that they get a good source of information, and a warm handoff is much more important, okay? Another thing is outreach outside of the box is going to be much more important because there's not going to be as many veteran-centered access points there, right? They're going to be further away from a medical center, so they're less likely to use the medical center. They're more likely to be using the Veteran Choice Card, right? They're more likely to be using private health care or none at all. If they're homeless, they're much harder to reach. A homeless vet in rural areas are much, much harder to reach. And so it's not just driving the homeless outreach van down the street and handing out sandwiches, right? This is an area where you're going to have to go out into much more deeper woods, literally sometimes, right? So rural outreach, you're investing much more time to reach much fewer veterans. It's very, very difficult work, and we should not underestimate how difficult rural outreach is. Next slide, please. VA and vet centers, great place to do outreach. Younger veterans are going to the VA. In fact, we're seeing an uptick in that. Hopefully in the next few years, the VA and the DOD figure out how to actually do records transfer so that it's much smoother and it actually happens the way it's supposed to. And they're projecting that they're going to do that. I don't have a whole lot of faith in that, but hopefully it happens. Let's remain hopeful. But doing outreach at the VA and vet centers is great because they should know the veterans and should be able to make really good referrals over because they should know the veteran there. And if they know your program, they should be able to make really good referrals. Next slide, please. And that leads us into kind of a new national initiative. Now, not all of the VAs are up on this, but most of them are. So check your local medical centers, but every medical center is supposed to, and most have already hired this person, have a community employment coordinator, or CEC. Now, if you don't know who the CEC is at your medical center, calling them might be a little bit difficult. So what we're recommending is actually call Rebecca Starr or email Rebecca and find out who your local CEC is, because they're so new at the medical center that even some of the medical centers don't know who they are. So to find out who your local rep is, if you don't know them already, get a hold of Rebecca rather than calling your local medical center because they're that new. All right, but that can be a really great place to start in that outreach to the medical centers. This is a very new position, but that can really help you out a lot, especially in conjunction with the recently returning veteran coordinators, right? These are two really critical positions at VA that you should be working with together. All right, next slide, please. Also in line with the VA is the VSOs, right? The Veteran Service Organizations and the county veteran service officers, right? Each county should have these. I know here in the state of California, every county is legally obligated to have them. Not all states have that, but here in California we have that. But there are so many awesome veteran service organizations out there, like Swords to Plowshares, like so many of you who are on this webinar are great veteran service organizations. So make sure that those veteran service organizations, so even though younger era veterans aren't accessing the veteran service organizations at the same rate as we have in the past, the veterans who really need a lot of help are still accessing VSOs. And so highly vulnerable veterans are still accessing VSOs. So make sure that you're still outreaching to them. Make sure that they know you and that they can still make referrals. Next slide, please. Colleges, we talked about colleges already. Make sure we're not forgetting about community colleges. Make sure, of course, we're outreaching to the student veteran organizations and the GI Bill accrediting agents. but I really want to point out here some of the less obvious ones, right? Make sure that you're outreaching to the places because, again, the younger era veterans were not getting engaged in the same ways that previous era veterans have. But we are still getting engaged, right? So check out some of the disability offices and groups, the LBGT offices and groups, the EOP offices, some of the different groups on campuses because veterans are still getting involved, but we're getting involved in different ways. We're getting, still being, physically fit, but there's a lot of social activism happening. Veterans are getting involved in social movements and in different ways than maybe we have in the past, but there is still a lot going on. And so some of those different groups that are happening on campus can be different groups that you can be outreaching to. All right. Next slide, please. Oh, and we're here at our next poll question, so I'm going to turn it back over to Antonio for this poll question again, and I'm going to mute myself.
Hello, everyone. The question is, what primary social media platforms do you use for outreach? Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, or none? And unfortunately, you can only choose one. But if you could do that and give you a couple seconds to do that. And then we'll look at the results. All right, we should be good. Give you another second here. A couple of people are coming in. Can you see that, Jeff?
Yep, I do. Okay, so lots of Facebook, which is good, and quite a few of none. What I would say is, and we'll talk about it a little bit more as we go on, but I would highly suggest we start using LinkedIn a bit more. LinkedIn is really great, and for lots of different reasons, especially when we're talking employment. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along, but I suggest familiarizing yourselves with LinkedIn a lot. Okay, so let's go back to the slideshow.
Just one moment. I apologize.
No problem.
Alrighty.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so talking about digital outreach, right? Digital outreach is really important, and there's lots of different ways we can do that, right? And Facebook is a great tool, and younger vets are on social media actually in even greater numbers than our counterparts in this generation, which of course is on social media more than any other generation has been in the past, obviously, right? That should be pretty obvious to us, but and even more so among veterans. And so there's ways that you can go about doing that, right? Next slide, please. Let me see. Yeah, so all these things that are going in should be strategic in the way that you're doing that. So like LinkedIn, for example, right? LinkedIn actually offers a free year's worth of their premium service for veterans. So that veterans can actually network. They can send emails to possible employers. They can take a look at unlimited number of profiles and do a lot more networking for free for a year in that job search just for being a veteran. So, and like my resume, so even my off of LinkedIn profile, my resume, I hyperlink my name directly to my LinkedIn profile so that they're interactive in the two, right? Each of my employers I hyperlink those to their website so that they can check out who I've been employed by, all of that stuff. So they're very interactive in the two. My Twitter handle is on my resume so that you can click on that and see what I've been tweeting about, right? all of these things are very interactive. And so, and like with your Twitter, you can actually start to tweet, let's say, at an author who's been writing about veteran employment and actually get into a Twitter conversation, because a lot of veterans who are looking for work might be following that. So a lot of these things, again, just like with the outreach, where maybe you're not doing direct outreach and having that direct conversation with the veteran, those veterans might see that. And in fact, with social networking, it ends up being an echo chamber where thousands or even millions of veterans might see this in a way that they wouldn't just by putting up a flyer somewhere. All right, next slide, please. Email. Email is really important as a tool for keeping supporters abreast of what's going on, getting information about your program out there to groups, but it's not really an outreach tool. And this is something that's really important to understand, because it's great for what it is, but what it's not is it's not really an outreach tool. It's not a tool for reaching veterans about your program. It's great for updating supporters, updating funders, things like that. It's really not a way to reach new veterans, though. So we really have to understand what outreach is and what it isn't, or what email is and what it isn't, excuse me. Next slide, please. Standardized intake is something that you'll hear preached at Swords of Plowshares quite often. And in fact, the reason why you hear it preached at Swords of Plowshares so much is that the biggest frustration that I hear voiced by veterans that are friends of mine and clients that come through the door at Swords about the VA and other agencies is I have to tell my story over and over again. I have to tell the same thing to one person, like, oh, I have to tell it to this nurse, and then I go in and tell the doctor the same story I just told the nurse, and then I got to go down the hall and tell the next person, and I got to go down the hall and tell the next person. And I've told this same story 10 times over and over again. Okay, so having a standardized intake, especially if you have, let's say, an HVRP and then you have an SSVF program under the same roof, right? Having a standardized intake where a veteran doesn't have to answer the same question a bunch of different times can really help you, especially it will really help you keep that customer service mentality in mind. Remember where we started off with that customer service mentality in mind. All right, next slide, please. And again, along that customer service mentality is that wraparound service. Remember, when that veteran walks through the door, they're a fully formed human being. This isn't just a job seeker walking through the door. It's a human being who probably has a lot of different problems, and they are coming in because they're looking for work, but they also might have legal issues or health issues or any number of other issues. And working at Swords, I'm a little bit spoiled in the fact that we have so much under one roof, but even we have to make recommendations for services out of house. We have to send somebody other places. And so this is also why knowing your continuum of care can be so important, because you are going to have to make handoffs, right? And they should be warm handoffs. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. But next slide. So again, this is why you have to know your continuum of care, because no agency can possibly have everything under one roof. Even an agency as great that I love as much as I do Swords. And believe me, I moved across the country to work at Swords. I love working at Swords of Plowshares. But we don't have everything under one roof. It's impossible to do that. So we have to make recommendations. We have to refer out of house. But you don't just hand somebody a flyer for that program and say, oh, go down the street to this program. Here, this is where you go for WIC. This is where you go for SNAP. No, you go to SNAP. You go, okay, here's Judy's at WIC. I'm going to call Judy. She's going to expect you. Here's where you go. You know, it's making a warm handoff can make all the difference in the world for your client. Next slide, please. And so we're wrapping up here, and this is the time where we're going to take questions. So you can type your questions in to Antonio, and then he will relate them to me. So we'll take a second and allow you to type in any questions that you have. Antonio, do we have any questions already?
Yeah, I'll give people some time to write in. I have one question for you. Right, they were asking about limited space for example, not having a whole vet center to decorate, but more of just a cubicle. I know for example, like in a university, they don't have a whole office sometimes for veterans. So just that cubicle, did you have any tips on decorating a limited space?
Yeah, so sometimes less is more, right? You know, if you're worried about space and things like that, you know, just putting up a simple sign can be good. You know, not trying to, again, it's kind of like this similar thing in materials. You don't have to fill up every single space with something, right? It's not like, oh, we got to make sure we have a flag in for every single branch of service, right? You don't have to fill in every bit of space with something, right? It's okay to have a cubicle wall there and just have that sign that says that this is the vet's location, right? Again, think of it in a similar way to the materials, right? Veterans tend to see certain things over and over again, and it becomes white noise, right? So that sometimes just that sign that says, you know, with the name of your office or the name of that desk can work just fine.
And I had another question for you. Frequent problem for many rural organizations is transportation.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for connecting younger veterans specifically in those areas, and maybe, you know, taking your previous being here in D.C. and then also in the Bay Area? I was wondering if you had any suggestions for everyone.
So one of the big things that you can do is try and group things together for the veteran so that the veteran doesn't have to travel a bunch of times for a bunch of different things, right? So trying to get, you know, things a day together where the veteran, you know, if the veteran's already going to be at the medical center, say, for a medical appointment, well, can you meet for lunch that time, or can we meet sometime that day or something like that? So trying to group things together in a way that's already convenient. I mean, keep that customer service mentality in your head, right? Understanding that veteran already has a life and has things going on, and that transportation is going to be an issue, right? And trying to group things. So I always try to, so when I was in D.C., we actually expanded our program. We're serving out into rural Virginia, and I had to drive way out there some of those days. And it was understanding. Some days I spent an entire day just to outreach to one veteran. And sometimes it meant that I understood that I was going to soak in those hours just to outreach to one person. And it was a struggle at first getting my boss to understand that rural outreach was not the same. And it meant some hard conversations with my boss to understand that if I was supposed to do rural outreach and urban outreach together, that those were completely different strategies. And that when I was doing rural outreach, it meant that I was going to take a lot of time to outreach to less veterans. And that was something that they had to be okay with. And then grouping things together, making sure that I could do as much in a day as I could. So that meant being convenient and posting up sometimes at a medical center, or going to that event, going to the county fair, going to some of those other events where I could see lots of different people from that community at once, going to that football game or that concert or that local fair or some of those other events where I could see lots of people from the community.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I did have another question. It pertained to rural events again, and I think that with, just like you said, going to the concerts and going to, you know, even like a county fair or anything like that, would you agree with me to sort of get where everyone would be, the biggest population that you could outreach to those people? Would you suggest anywhere else rural?
I think that trying to find what events are in the area. So part of it is getting to know the area. You know, sometimes it's I would go some mornings and just go have breakfast at the local, you know, diner, right? I would just go have breakfast and talk to folks and see what's coming up, you know, because it can be tough to figure out what's happening in the area. So if you're doing rural outreach, it's about investing time and talking to people, right? I mean, all outreach is, but rural outreach is even more so about investing that time in. And you're gonna have to put in that shoe leather, and you're gonna have to be out there in a very kind of different way, and you're gonna have to soak in a lot more hours just to talk to that one vet. And for me, that meant sometimes finding out, you know, I lived in the District of Columbia, but I had to do outreach into rural Virginia, which meant I didn't know rural Virginia. I wasn't from there. And so when I was doing that outreach, sometimes it meant going out and having breakfast one morning at the diner and just talking to folks for a few hours and finding out, all right, so what's the things, what is coming up in this area? You know, what are some of the events that people are going to be going to? And then once I found out what those events were, all right, so who's running them? Who's putting it on? And then I got to figure out, okay, how do I get a table at those events? All that stuff happened because I was willing to go out and talk to people. You can't be shy. Doing outreach, you can't be shy. You got to get out there and talk to people, and you got to be willing to put that out there. And you say, hey, I'm trying to get vets jobs, and I work for this is my agency, and you got to have business cards. I'll tell you, I burned through thousands and thousands of business cards, and then probably most of them ended up in recycling bins or trash cans. But I handed out my business card like it was going out of style. Everybody got a business card from me. And that's just the way it was. Every person I talked to, hey, here's my business card. You talk to a vet, have them give me a call. That's just every person I talked to. They got a business card from me.
Do you have any tips for helping young veterans to actively engage in mental health services, as in the terms of limiting their fear of the stigma?
Well, one of the things that I mean, yes, in a way, in that I'm not sure how it'll work for others, but I had an advantage in the sense that I am an Iraq combat vet, and I am service-connected, and I would talk about my own experience, and I tried to destigmatize this stuff just by saying what my own experience was, you know, and going to get help myself, and tried to lower the stigma by kind of living that life and just being that example in and of myself. Lowering the stigma for others, I would say that, talking to people and really breaking it down in the sense of, like, you know, if they had a leg injury, if they had a knee injury, would there be a stigma attached to it? I mean, mental health is just an injury. It's an injury just like any other, and it's not getting any better by ignoring it. Just like that knee injury is not getting any better by ignoring it. The only way that knee injury is going to get any better is to go in and get some treatment, some PT, maybe some surgery, and maybe even some medication. That's the only way to make it better. And it's the same way about your mental health injury. Whether that mental health injury is depression, whether that mental health injury is PTSD, the only way to make it any better is to go get treatment for it. Just like that knee injury, you know, I have both from Iraq, right? I got a pretty bad knee injury that for 10 years I've had trouble with, right? And it hurts me just about every day, that knee injury, just like my PTSD bothers me. And I go get treatment for both, right? I might be getting another knee surgery. I got an appointment with a surgeon next month to possibly get another knee surgery. Well, you know, that's just part of what happens when you're a combat vet. You get these injuries, they can happen. The mental health injuries are just the same way, and I think maybe talking about them in terms of mental health injuries. They're injuries that we sustained in combat.
Well, I want to thank you, Jeff, very much for this. And on this slide, you should see Rebecca Starr's contact there. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us. She had to catch a flight. And there's also Jeff's email address there, and if you have further questions, you can email them, or you can email me as well. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Jeff.
Not a problem.
I'll keep this up just for about 2 more minutes.